This happened when I was a teenager. Whenever Chuseok or Lunar New Year came around, my family would usually go to my grandmother's house in the countryside a few days beforehand to perform the ancestral rites. After we came back home, the house was always freezing cold, so I went upstairs and turned on all the lights in every room. But that night, for some reason, my room, the room I slept in, was strangely warm. The rest of the house was filled with a freezing chill, but only my room was warm. I thought, that's strange. So I turned up the heating, turned on all the lights in my room, and eventually fell asleep. I was exhausted, and before long, the whole family had fallen asleep. But at some point, I woke up because there was an incredible amount of noise. I opened my eyes and found myself lying in the middle of a road. I thought, am I having sleep paralysis? I looked around frantically, and I was actually lying on what looked like some kind of wooden board in the middle of the road. It felt exactly like sleep paralysis. I was terrified. I was trembling uncontrollably, but I couldn't move my body at all. But I clearly remembered falling asleep in my room, so I kept thinking, this isn't really outside. This is my room. Then I looked at the faces of the people around me, but I couldn't see their faces. They were all completely featureless, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, and they were walking around noisily. I keep calling them people, but I think they may have actually been ghosts. I was completely unable to move, absolutely terrified, when an elderly woman suddenly said, "Hey, young lady, why are you lying here in the middle of the road?" Then she grabbed my leg, lifted it up, and dragged me out of the way, almost as if she were throwing me aside. And the moment she did that, I woke up from the sleep paralysis. I was so terrified that I suddenly sat straight up in bed. Without even realizing it, I started mumbling to myself. It was freezing that night, and as I closed the living room door and my bedroom door, I said, "It's too noisy, please leave." I was still trembling uncontrollably and thinking about how terrifying everything was. But I had been so exhausted that I eventually lay back down on my bed. Then I got the strange feeling that something was leaving through the door and the window. I thought, what is this? And after that, the warmth in my room disappeared. To this day, I still don't know whether they were actual people or spirits. But whatever happened that night only happened in my room. So I still wonder, why did I experience it alone? What was that warmth in my room that night? I still don't know. And there's one more thing I should add. I was sleeping in my room, while my younger brother and sister were sleeping in another room. But that night, all of us saw the exact same ghost at the same time. It was a male ghost. His face was covered in burn-like wounds, with scars and injuries all over it. The only thing that stood out were his completely white eyes. He suddenly rose up from underneath my bed. Then he started flicking his tongue in and out as he came toward me. He kept getting right up in my face and acting in this disgusting, creepy way. I was absolutely terrified. I kept saying, "Go away, go away," but the spirit just kept coming closer. At one point, I could actually feel it touching my skin. I hated it. I was so disgusted and terrified that somehow, when I was finally able to move, I reached out and hit the ghost in the face. Then I screamed. About 10 minutes later, I heard my younger sibling scream from the other room. My whole family came running out and asked what had happened. I told them. I was so scared. A ghost appeared in my room. Then my sibling said, "I saw the exact same ghost, the same face." That terrified us even more, so I remember asking my mother to perform a protective ritual in each of our rooms. But ever since we started sleeping on this bed, strange things kept happening. At first, my second oldest son slept on it, but he would suddenly sit straight up in the middle of the night and say, "Mom, I'm so scared," before coming over to sleep beside me. So I asked, "What are you scared of?" But after my daughter started sleeping on that bed, there were several times when something truly dangerous almost happened. It was the middle of the night when she suddenly ran outside crying. When we asked her why, she said that a friend had come to her and asked her for help, so she had run out after them. The alley outside our house was narrow, but it was still wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic. And because we couldn't see whether a car was coming from the other side, anyone who simply ran out into the road could easily get hit. But my daughter was still in elementary school at the time. She ran outside several times and nearly got hit by a car. We thought, this is too dangerous. We can't let this continue. So we told her, you can't sleep in this room anymore. What's wrong with all of you today? She said that someone kept calling her. I couldn't understand it. The bed hadn't been used by anyone else. We had barely used it at all. We had simply brought it over from the guest room. So I kept wondering, how could something like this be happening? Then I decided to sleep on it myself. I worked rotating shifts, so sometimes I would come home after staying up all night, or leave the house in the early hours of the morning. One night, while I was lying there, someone suddenly rang the doorbell. So I asked, who is it? But I didn't even pick up the intercom. I just called out, who is it? While lying in bed. Then the voice outside said, your package has arrived. You need to come out and get it right away. Early morning delivery services exist nowadays, but back then, early morning delivery didn't exist at all. So I said, just leave it outside the door. But the voice replied, you need to receive it in person. So I said, okay, and got up to go outside. But as I walked toward the door, I suddenly noticed that distinctive early morning smell. You know that smell in the air at dawn, the smell of a new morning. So I thought, wait, it's morning. There's no way a package would be delivered at this hour, and opened the door. There was no one there. I wondered, did I imagine it? Did I hear something wrong? Then I thought about it again. Someone had apparently been ringing the doorbell, but I hadn't even picked up the intercom and spoken to anyone. So whoever, or whatever it was, had been calling me outside. I thought, I guess that's what happened. But even after that, on several other nights, I kept being woken up in the early hours of the morning. Sometimes, I would hear someone calling me outside in the middle of the night. And if I had actually gone outside without realizing what I was doing, just like my child had, I could have ended up in a situation where I might have been hit by a car. So we even installed one of those convex traffic mirrors in front of our house, the kind that lets you see cars approaching from both directions near the entrance. After that, I realized that the bed wasn't something only I had experienced. My children had all experienced strange things as well. Of course, we could have asked someone to come and take the bed away, but I kept thinking, what if someone else ends up using it? So I thought, oh, I must have just heard it wrong. But then I realized something. Someone had kept ringing the doorbell, yet I hadn't actually picked up the intercom and spoken to anyone. So whoever it was, they had been calling me from outside, trying to get me to come out. I thought, well, maybe that's what happened. But even after I slept there several more times, I kept getting woken up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I would hear someone calling me outside, and if I had actually gone out without thinking, just like a child, I could have been hit by a car. So we ended up installing one of those convex safety mirrors near our gate, the kind that lets you see whether cars are coming from either direction. After that, I realized that it wasn't just me who had experienced strange things with that bed. My children had experienced them too. Of course, I could have asked someone to come and take the bed away. But then I thought, what if someone else ends up using it and the same thing happens to them? It was dangerous, so I couldn't just leave it there. In the end, I broke all of it apart and put the pieces outside. Normally, I probably would have just asked someone to move it outside or dispose of it for me, but I think I was simply too afraid. My parents have always been incredibly self-sacrificing when it comes to us. Every weekend, they would always take us somewhere to have fun. I think I was about 1 year old at the time. It was summer, and we went to a river to play in the water. It was the Hantangang River. Back then, people were still allowed to set up tents there, so we put up a tent and made ourselves comfortable. I guess we hadn't properly heard the weather forecast because apparently rain was expected. Anyway, we had put a watermelon in the river to keep it cool, set up our tent, and were cooking food and having a great time. At Hantangang, the river's layout is a little different now, but back then, the water wasn't particularly deep. There were even areas in the middle of the river, almost like little islands, where people could get out and play. I think I remember that too. Anyway, I remember my family playing music really loudly, dancing, and having a great time. We spent the whole day playing in the water, and eventually we all completely passed out from exhaustion. But suddenly, in the middle of the night, my parents started frantically waking us up, and when I opened my eyes, I realized that water had flooded into our tent. So I remember thinking, what is going on? Outside, the rain was absolutely pouring. The things we had left in the water to keep cool were being swept toward us, and everything was starting to float away. So my parents loaded all of us into the car while we were still half asleep. They folded up the tent frame and threw everything into the trunk while it was still soaking wet. The water had risen incredibly quickly. The river level was going up at an alarming rate. Meanwhile, the people who had been on the little island in the middle of the river had been drinking and praying, so they were having a great time and were completely unaware of what was happening. My parents started shouting at them, "Come out! You need to get out of there! Come out now!" They were actually people from our neighborhood. They had come there as part of a local gathering, and that's where my parents happened to run into them. My parents were there with our family, while those people had come as a group. So my dad kept yelling at them to get out quickly because the rain was coming down so heavily and the water was rising. At least, that's how I remember it. But they couldn't hear him. The music was simply too loud. Anyway, our belongings were being swept away, so we left. We hadn't been driving for very long when the rain became so unbelievably heavy that even with the windshield wipers going full speed, we could barely see the road ahead. And that's when I suddenly started whining that I needed to go to the bathroom. Back then, my dad drove a car called Estella. Since I kept saying that I needed to go to the bathroom, my parents pulled over, let me out to use the restroom, and then we got back into the car. But then the engine wouldn't start. No matter how many times my dad tried, the car simply would not start. We were practically stranded on the road, with nowhere to go and nowhere to sleep. My parents called repair shops and tried to find someone who could come out and help us, but because of the heavy rain and the situation on the roads, no one was able to come. There was a church nearby, but my parents weren't religious, and my dad felt uncomfortable about going inside. The people there also said that they couldn't just let anyone in, so we were left wondering what we were going to do. My dad had previously served overseas in a war, and because of what happened during that time, he had lost a significant amount of hair toward the front of his head. He tried stopping cars on the road to ask for help, but nobody would stop. In fact, people would actually see my dad and drive away from him. So my dad spent more than an hour standing there, waving his arms and trying to get someone to stop. Then a military vehicle came by and finally pulled over. But before helping us, the soldiers first checked whether my dad was actually a person. I remember thinking, what? So I wondered why nobody had stopped for us. Then they told us that there were apparently a lot of people who got swept away by the current and drowned in that area. The soldier had actually driven past us at first because he wasn't planning to stop either. But when he saw my dad, he apparently thought of his own father. So he pulled over and stopped. We told him that our car wouldn't start, and he gave us a jump start. We were incredibly grateful. From that moment on, my dad kept saying, "Even if you have to go to the bathroom, just hold it." And I think he drove home as fast as he possibly could. We pulled the car into our garage, and then all of us completely collapsed and fell asleep. When we woke up the next morning and checked the car, all 4 tires were flat. The wheels were literally resting directly on the ground. All 4 of them. I still don't know how we managed to drive all the way home like that. And unfortunately, everyone who had been staying and enjoying themselves on that island that night died.